Thank you very much. Most of you know I'm a recently retired member of the California Institute of Integral Studies, faculty emeritus, and also faculty emeritus from the University of North Carolina. We're a little short on time. I have a 20-minute video that covers my lecture, which I made because it was having some internet problems. So we still have time for that. So Lisa, can you just play that video? And if we have time afterwards, I'll answer questions. But it's essentially my talk without the internet problems.
Okay.
Otherwise, I can share a screen and try it here.
I'll do it from here if you'd like.
Yeah, just roll it. You probably have a better connection than I do.
Okay, 1 second, folks, while I share screen here.
And then play from beginning. Yeah, thank you. I live in Ecuador, and
Uh-oh. What happened?
I don't know, it started fine. Sometimes,
Oh, there we go.
Even though I have good Wi-Fi, sometimes Zoom connection Thank you. Is allowed, and I'll get
What about you?
Okay, we're off and running. I'm going to make a recording here and provide some time to talk about it as we go along. So I want to talk about intersubjectivity, a term coined by Edmund Husserl, as we see here, referring to shared experience between individuals. And we'll talk about it. There is intersubjectivity woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, as Ken Wilber and a number of other people have emphasized the sharing of human experience and sharing of consciousness, which is best coined in the word intersubjectivity. It's a sort of intimate connection between individuals or between living beings. So this is something that really was outside the realm of behaviorists and classical Newtonian science. I'll get back to that theme. This is Martin Buber, who most of you know has written a great deal about quote-unquote I and thou, a relationship between individuals, relationship between individuals and the divine. That's a sort of emotional, intimate connection that people have. And Martin Buber was very influential back in the 60s and 70s with the concept of authenticity, of actually being in connection, excuse me, with other people and other beings. So we'll move right on with that, but here we are as a notion of intersubjectivity, in which there's an I and there's a thou, and there's an overlap of their experience. This is something that really couldn't be understood in terms of Newtonian science. So if you do the literature search on this, you'll find a lot of discussion by cognitive psychologists, people like Dan Dennett, who is an absolute materialist. And it sure makes sense that we have this shared experience when we're talking to each other, communicating with each other. So it's easy, in my idea anyway, easy to deny its authenticity as a real aspect of experience. I won't go into it in detail here, but my first experience of this was in intimate relationships as a young man, and being in love and having, well, essentially sex with women. And the idea that there was just times when it seemed like we were almost one person. Of course, those are times when we're all talking and communicating through a lot of different channels, but there seems to be more to it than that. Newtonian science, as you know, started with the Enlightenment and has really emphasized the mechanical work. And one of the fundamental principles of it is that everything is made of separate pieces, whether they're planets or whether they're atoms or whatever they are. They're like these metal balls that bang together. In fact, Newton was very puzzled by gravity itself, which was the force that didn't seem to have a mechanical connection. And there was talk about particles, like atomic particles, having little hooks on them or something, because action at a distance, or the idea of a field, was really not developed yet. And yet we see what looks like connections, intimate connections, between individuals, both in life, human life, and in animals. You've seen, I'm sure you've all seen movies of these bird patterns that seem to be so well organized, and something's going on there. Seems like more than mechanical causality or behavioral connections. Fish do the same thing, in fact. Animals in general do. Horses, humans, we connect with each other and we connect with animals. So there's a kind of intimacy between individuals, and sometimes between individuals and animals, and certainly between animals and other animals. So this is a concept of intersubjectivity that I'm moving forward as a real dimension of consciousness experience. It's almost like we have a field around us, and those of you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake and his morphic field idea, it makes a lot of sense that within a range of space around us, there's an influential field. Perhaps it's not limited by space. Perhaps it's essentially infinite. I don't know. So I'm going to shift gears here and go to something you're all familiar with. I presume Ken Wilber's basic model, 4 quadrants. Upper left is intentional, and that's the experiential side or subjective side. Excuse me. But I'm emphasizing intersubjectivity, which goes on in the lower left quadrant. That is, involves more than one person or more than one living being, and yet is still an inner experience. It's still a conscious experience. If you're familiar with the Wilber-Combs matrix, which has gotten a fair amount of publicity, he and I mapped consciousness in terms of development, growth and development on the vertical axis, states of consciousness on the horizontal axis. Ken was mainly interested in mystical states, so that's what we have there, but you can do a Wilber-Combs matrix in a number of different ways. And I'm adding a new dimension here. I'm not the first person to talk about it by a long shot, but I'm adding it, so I'm calling you this as the Wilber-Combs hypermatrix, if you will. And there's a dimension coming up that's orthogonal to growth in states, which is intersubjectivity that's shared. Now, talking about this in Newtonian physics, as we just saw, is difficult because objects are separate. One of the fundamental features of Enlightenment physics is objects are all separate. They bang into each other. They might be hooked to each other. There are a few things like gravity that are a mystery, but I'm sure they'll get solved. At least they were sure they would get solved. But today, it's not such a problem. We know that objects at the atomic level are connected in strange and different ways that don't involve hooks and don't involve bumping into each other in a kind of mechanical or Newtonian fashion. So we can talk about, for example, if 2 atomic particles interact in an intimate way and then are separated, they remain in what's called a singlet state. They're, in quantum physics, part of the same system. So if one of them goes to Alpha Centauri and the other one goes to Paris, they still share certain features. And we could talk more about that in terms of quantum physics. But the point is, they are no longer separate objects in the Newtonian sense. My wife points out that this is a little bit like getting married, you know. Now you're part of the same system. You can be separate for a while, quite a long while, but somehow you are still connected. All right. So there's a kind of resonance that goes on between objects in the singlet state. And generally in quantum physics, particles and objects, you call them objects, they're really energy fields, are not separated in the old Newtonian sense. So I'm proposing here that we think of this kind of thing in terms of human beings as well, and living creatures. Uh, People that are in love, or even if they're not in love, if they're intimately related, they connect with each other. And it's surprising how often one person will know something that another person is thinking. We've all had many synchronistic experiences, like thinking of an old friend and then the phone rings. You know the story. Well, this is a very recent article in Scientific American magazine in which people are connected by EEGs. And the bottom line is that when they begin to talk to each other and share experiences, their EEG patterns fall into a kind of synchrony. I don't think this is really the fine grade symphony, synchrony of alpha and beta rhythms locking together, but you can tell that the brain waves are growing, changing together. And the figure on the right, these people are talking, and as they talk together, the excitation level and amplitude of the brain waves synchronizes. So when you're even just talking to somebody else, if you have a relationship with them, there's a synchronization of brain wave activity. I have an old friend who worked with healers and healies, healers and people being healed at a distance, psychologically or mentally, and she worked with MRIs, very complex stuff, and found that when the healer is focusing on someone to heal them, and the other person is being receptive, there are high correlations in the MRIs that come out of that, even if they're at a distance, considerable distance. Excuse me. So this is all groundwork basis for thinking today about intersubjectivity, because it's not a weird sort of thing, and like Daniel Dennett reduced it, and other people reduced it to just behavioral features in language, but I think it's more intimate than that. We can think of the human spirit as a very complex structure, and when we are intimate with other people, these structures lock together. So these are fractal patterns representing separate individuals and their psychic experience. And we're all embedded in a large field of others. So connections at subtle levels can occur all over the place. And again, if you're a fan of Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields, you can see this sort of thing happening. So we live in a universe in which we may be more connected to other people than traditional science would allow. Although I don't really have time to talk about it here, but there's a lot of stories from primary cultures, Australia, India, other places, of people being connected through the family. So your brother is having some kind of an issue. If you're an Australian indigenous person, and you may feel certain twitches in your body and certain sensations that indicate you better check with your brother who's 1,000 miles away. So we live in a larger universe, psychic universe, than we used to think. So we might talk a little bit about panpsychism. Panpsychism is the idea that consciousness is essentially everywhere. It permeates the universe. There's no place, there's none of it. There are a lot of forms of panpsychism. And when I started working with consciousness research 20 or 30 years ago, I would go to the big conferences, and they'd always put us panpsychists, Ken Wilber's one as well, by the way, they'd always put us in the back room somewhere. But now panpsychism has become a major issue, or a major topic, or highly respected, so things have changed dramatically. A lot of this comes from physics, and look at the nature of quantum physics and how nothing seems to happen if it's not observed. We could spend a lot of time on that, but panpsychism has become a respectable point of view. And most of that comes out of physics originally, now in philosophy. So here, for example, in the hidden order of reality, there is no distinction between mind and matter. The split between the inner and the outer, the subjective and the objective, that we experience in ordinary life is unknown in deeper reality. That is, the unity of the universe is experienced in a deeper reality. So some of the people who are associated with panpsychism are Alfred North Whitehead on the left, lower left there. There's a lot of argument about whether he was really a panpsychist or not, and so don't jump on me about that. His philosophy is very complex, difficult to understand, but it certainly had panpsychic elements to it. Henri Bergson, the great French philosopher, was certainly a panpsychist and of the view that the brain picks up consciousness or filters consciousness or acts like a radio or TV for consciousness, but consciousness is not made in the brain in any kind of mechanical sense. Wait a minute, that you can find on the web. Let me stick with me. There we are. Some great interviews with him that you can find on the web. He is an adamant panpsychist, and he argues well for it. And he has recently called together a conference, newsworthy conference actually, that brought together people like David Chalmers and other philosophers from all around the world to seriously talk about panpsychism. This is a big change from 20 years ago, I can tell you. That's his book, Galileo's Error. The error was that he did everything from a mathematical model and build out from that. That would be a whole discussion, but just to let you know. I think everyone's familiar with Teilhard de Chardin, actually Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was certainly a famous panpsychist and saw consciousness evolving in the direction of some sort of unified point, which he called the omega point. So, in some sense, through subjective experience, we all can find ourselves moving in this direction, that into a great unity of consciousness. Now, I personally am not an advocate of the omega point view. Supposedly it happens through love, and it's really a Christian kind of idea as he saw it. But I do think, and this is something I can talk about a lot, that what I see going on around me in this world, and I've written some about it, is that there's a tendency for more and more what you would call intersubjective experiences. And all you have to do is be a jazz musician to know about that. You're in a group, you're playing Dixieland or something, and you're all part of the same experience. But it's not only in musicians. I think it's popping up all over the place, and there are spiritual communities that are actively working in the direction of sharing conscious experiences. Andrew Cohen, for example, controversial figure, but a dear friend of mine, has worked with people on this so that they could form groups that really felt they were sharing common experiences. Believe it or not, I'm a Quaker Buddhist, and I've been to Quaker meetings that are called gathered meetings. And they're silent meetings, but you just feel like you're part of everyone that's there. And when there's a gathered meeting, people know it. They get up to, oh my gosh, that was a gathered meeting. We were all in one experience together. Okay, there's another version of popular, I shouldn't say popular, serious version of consciousness studies by Bernardo Kastrup called analytic idealism. Strange notion, but basically Kastrup's idea is that the universe is consciousness, and that in some sense is all there is. and everything that derives out of that is an idea. Idealism, in the formal sense, quote unquote, idealism goes all the way back to Plato. Hegel was an idealist. There's a lot of history to that topic. So I only mention him because I want to indicate that there are some very creative ideas coming out right now around the topic of consciousness that are very new. So I'm going to finish up here, and I hope we have some time. I can answer questions live online. So all the best to everyone. I'm going to stop recording. Okay, thank you. That was had a couple of bumps in the recording, but it worked out pretty well. I think according to my clock, I have 5 more minutes, and since I'm not on West Coast time, I probably won't be here tonight. But are there any quick questions or comments? Yes, Lisa, you're muted. Do you have something to say?
So, I'd like to hold the questions until the panel discussion time. Just so we can pull everything together first. Would you
Yeah,
like
I
to say
appreciate
a
that.
few more
Remember,
words?
I'm not on West Coast time, and it's just not going to be possible for me to be there.
No, this is just like right after, like,
Oh,
not later tonight, like now, but I want to give
okay.
you those 5
Right.
minutes to like have any last words that you'd like to add, maybe in light of what you heard this morning already.
Yeah. Well, it's I don't have anything prepared. I am really pleased to see the interest in Gebser's work. I haven't done a lot of Gebserian work for a few years, but there was a time when I was very involved with Gebser, and there was a scholar that some of you may remember, Georgi Feuerstein, wrote maybe the best book on Gebser that's been written. Unfortunately, there's a long story to why it's not published in an affordable way. I was even invited to Germany to meet with the Gebser Society a number of years ago. So I've been quite fascinated with him. And, I'm a Wilberian. I've worked with Ken over the years, but Ken was deeply influenced by Gebser. You can hardly separate them. And I have a friend, Simon, I don't remember how to pronounce his last name, Cezanne, who recently has translated a large book by Gebser that's not available yet, but he's been laboring away with translators in Germany, and so we'll see more Gebser coming. In fact, I remember from one of the meetings a few years ago that there were problems with copyright, and the family was releasing more stuff. David, you're shaking your head. Do you know something? I mean, you're nodding. Do you know something about this?
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge to get the releases to be able to release some of the work, because we have other works that have been translated but can't be published without the permissions.
Well, I think Simon's gotten around that somehow by getting raw stuff from Germany that he's translating, and hopefully it'll be out fairly soon. So it's great to see the society come together with this conference. I've been sort of at a distance for a while, but certainly been a big part of my life. And Aurobindo was my really spiritual guru. I'm over 80 now. And when I got seriously interested in spiritual matters as a young man, actually it was Elmer Green who suggested some things by Aurobindo. This was back in the 60s. And I went and started to read Aurobindo. I read the diaries, or not the diaries, the letters. And I became a real devotee. I'm still sort of an Aurobindo devotee, although I eventually found a living teacher, as they say. But yeah, very important, wonderful insights through Aurobindo and then Gebser that just fused together as you think about them. And one more minute, any comments?
Well, should we?
My personal teacher was Swami Rama, and he used to say when people were silent that you were all in samadhi. And she said, when you're in samadhi, you have no questions. Thank you all very much. You've been
All
very
right.
polite, and I'll stick around for the discussion.
Thank you, Allan.